Steam power effectively ended the age of sail, but the change between sail and steam did not happen overnight. Rather, it was a very gradual and long and drawn-out process lasting around 80 years. Sailing vessels would still play a vital role in frontline combat well into the 19th century. To follow is the relatively unknown tale of a particularly angry wooden sailing ship of the line that took it to the ironclads and took it to the steamships. SMS Kaiser. So before diving straight into the action, the stage must first be set, the actors introduced, and the script read aloud. The Battle of Lissa, occurring during the Third Italian War of Independence, was a battle fought between the nascent Kingdom of Italy and the Austrian Empire, and it was over the Italian claims to the land of the region of Venetia, and specifically the city of Venice and territories previously owned by the Republic of Venice. Italy was supported in this war by way of their ally Prussia, who was also at war with the Austrians due to varying reasons in what seemed to be a never-ending power struggle between the two nations over hegemony in Central Europe following the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, courtesy of Napoleon Bonaparte. This war was known as the Bruderkrieg, or the Brother War. Whilst a war between Prussia and Austria was nothing new, a war on two fronts was something entirely different for the Austrians. The Italians saw this war as their chance to regain claimed lands, and they were correct, as it was near impossible that alone against the full might of the Austrian Empire, little Italy could achieve victory. Not without some serious help at least. There can be no doubt that on land at least during this war, the Austrians held the advantage against the Italians. The Prussians, on the other hand, well, that was an entirely different story. Now, I'm not going to cover the land campaign, so I'm not really going to look at Prussia and Austria at all. However, what I will be exploring is the naval war between Italy and Austria, in particular, its culmination. Enter stage left SMS Kaiser. Kaiser was a wooden 92-gun ship of the line, powered predominantly by sail, but she did have an auxiliary steam engine and a screw. Kaiser was built by the Austrian Empire and was barely about 8 years old at the time of the Battle of Lissa, and she was an absolute behemoth of a ship, although she was woefully outdated in comparison to the Italian ironclads, and in particular their flagship, a Fontadore. Interestingly enough, the Italians, despite barely having unified and achieved independence, had a considerable advantage over the Austrians, with each of the small precursor states of Italy coming together to form the new United Italian Navy. Now, on paper, the Italian fleet that would take part in the Battle of Lissa composed of 12 ironclads, 10 larger wooden vessels dispersed through amongst the battle line, and lastly 4 gunboats. Opposing this was the Austrian fleet, which by contrast was much smaller, numbering 7 ironclads, 1 wooden steamer, the 2-decker, SMS Kaiser, and 6 other wooden sailing ships, and 12 gunboats. It should be noted that many of the Austrian ships were undermanned and not carrying a full complement of main battery guns due to a Prussian embargo. The Italian fleet sailed for Lissa Island, or Vis in Italian, in an attempt to seize the island on the 20th of July 1866, under the command of Piedmontese Count Carlo di Persano, completely confident that they would achieve victory. Sailing forth to meet the Italian fleet was Austrian Konteradmiral Wilhelm von Tegethoff. The two admirals were polar opposites, and their differences in leadership would keenly show during the upcoming battle. Persano was a politician and a sailor, born in 1806 in the small yet powerful Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont. He first went to sea as a young man and subsequently rose very quickly through the ranks to command the Sardinian Piedmontese Navy from 1860 to 1861 during the initial struggles to unify Italy. Following this command, he became the Minister of Marine in 1862 before becoming a senator in 1865. Persano was undoubtedly overconfident, knowing he outnumbered his enemy, and due to that overconfidence, the Italian fleet was in a comparatively poor condition, with his ships in a poor state and his men not really well trained. Persano's adversary, the younger Tegethoff, born in 1827 in Marburg in the Austrian Empire, his father being an Oberleutnant in the army, and by way of his mother being related to the mayor of the empire's capital, Vienna, was a completely different kettle of fish. Tegethoff entered the Naval Academy in 1840 in Venice and became a sea cadet in 1845, just in time to witness the Venetian uprising of 1848 and to 49. He graduated in 49, and he was assigned to the blockade of Venice before being promoted twice, once in 1851 and a second time in 1852. Tegetthoff would first command the schooner Elizabeth in 1854, just as the Austrian Navy was beginning to convert to steam power. Tegetthoff patrolled the Danube during the Crimean War and befriended Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian. The young officer would continue to serve, building a rapport amongst the royalty and other officers, commanding different vessels as far as the coast of Morocco and Brazil, and during peace and war before being promoted to Konteradmiral in 1864, after an action in the North Sea against the Danish Navy, alongside the then Austrian ally of Pasha. Tegetthoff, unlike his counterpart, understood that the upcoming fight against the Italians would be incredibly bloody, incredibly difficult, and therefore trained crews were absolutely needed. Tegetthoff also relied heavily on scouting, something his Italian adversary was a bit loath to do. Having discovered the apparent pitfalls in the Italian command structure and the condition of the crews and ships, Tegetthoff set sail to intercept the Italian fleet. His plan was to make use of ramming in order to try and even the odds and achieve victory. Persano, dividing his fleet into 3 separate divisions, commanding the main battle force with 9 of the 12 ironclads, and his deputy Albini, not sure, again, I do not speak Italian, I have said this before in other videos, commanding a support division whose role was to undertake the landings and seize the island of Lissa. A third Italian admiral by the name of Vacca commanded the Italian reserve fleet, mostly of wooden smaller ships. Normally in any fleet, the chain of command is unquestionable, and with good reason, as this is vital to achieve cohesion and victory. There must only be one set of orders controlling the fleet. And well, this was not going to be the case for the Italians. Each of the admirals were political rivals with one another and would often undermine and interject with each other, causing extreme confusion amongst the fleet. Tegetthoff also split his fleet into 3 divisions, the first consisting of his ironclads, his real smashing power, the second consisting of 5 frigates centered around the SMS Kaiser's powerful 2 decks of guns, and lastly a small third division consisting of gunboats and armed merchantmen. Tegetthoff had ordered the Stadion, an armed merchant ship, ahead of the entire fleet to ensure that he would not accidentally blunder into an engagement. The Austrians had his fleet aligned in 3 consecutive V formations, with 1st Division under Tegetthoff himself acting as a vanguard, and the smaller 3rd Division acting as a rearguard. This hyper-aggressive formation of the Austrian fleet was intended to drive a portion of the Italian fleet off and obtain local superiority in close-range melee. I do wonder whether or not he had studied the Book of Nelson at this point, because this is very Nelsonic. By doing this, Tegetthoff hoped that he would be able to destroy a portion of the Italian fleet, one by one, and achieve numerical superiority over individual engagements and thus win the entire battle. Persano's lack of scouting and preparedness became even more evident when Tegetthoff managed to catch the entire Italian fleet off guard, as they busily prepared to land on the island of Lissa. When the news that the Austrian fleet was at sea and attempting to engage them reached Persano, he ordered the landings abandoned and the fleet into line abreast formation. And then, for some bizarre reason, Persano cancelled the order and ordered the fleet into an old Age of Sail formation with 3 divisions in line ahead. He would do a lot of weird things during the battle, but we'll get to that. The 1st Division, or vanguard of the Italian fleet, was made up of the ironclads Principe di Carigano and Kona Castigliardo, commanded by Admiral Vacca, and behind this division was the Italian centre, consisting of Persano's flagship, the Re d'Italia, San Martino and Palestro. Lastly, in the extreme rear of the Italian line was the Reggio Maria, Reis, Pia and Re di Portogallo. The Italian line consisted of 9 ironclads in total, with the 10th, the modern Affontadore, on the far side of the Italian 2nd Division. It is speculated that Persano intended to use this ship as a reserve? Maybe? The fleet was indeed formidable, and if their firepower was concentrated, it would have caused significant damage to the Austrian fleet. However, Persano decided that the recently regained state of cohesion after, confusing the formation and the orders was not entirely necessary, and he gave the order out of nowhere that all of a sudden he wanted to change flagships from the Re d'Italia to the Affontadore. For, again, reasons? The 2nd and 3rd Divisions slowed in order for Re d'Italia to lower its boats and then transfer the admiral, and presumably most of his staff. But the 1st Squadron, not knowing that the ships behind them had slowed down, just kept sailing forward, eventually becoming completely isolated and by itself. To make matters even worse, Persano's decision and the message that the flagship has changed wasn't told to anyone else. So during the upcoming battle, the Re d'Italia was getting looked at from everyone to give orders while it was being pummeled into oblivion, and Persano was just vibing on the Affontadore. Now, the mood aboard the Austrian fleet was palpable. While somewhat enthusiastic and keen to fight the Italian fleet, the knowledge that they were severely outgunned was definitely not lost on the men. The 31 Austrian ships held amongst them over 500 guns, and while this is a very significant number, the Italian fleet held over 100 more, and to cap off that advantage even further, the Italian ships had armour, and in some cases speed. Tegetthoff knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, and if the battle began to turn against the Austrians, he would have little chance to withdraw. But he was confident in his crews and his men that they could weather the storm and beat the Italians despite these odds. Persano, being Persano, decided that now he would ignore the warnings from a handful of ships on the lookout for the Austrian fleet that there was in fact an Austrian fleet nearby, and that it was, turning to fight them, and plod along. Although not really possible if anyone knows if he did try and do anything too well, because no one was looking at him for help, because they were all going, "Hey, what are you doing, Re d'Italia? Why are you just sort of doing your own thing now?" The Austrian fleet made directly for the centre of the Italian fleet, and the moment Tegetthoff saw the gap open between the 1st and 2nd Division, while Persano was doing Persano things, he took a leaf out of Admiral Nelson's playbook, and Tegetthoff allowed his own T to be crossed, as he positioned his fleet right between the 1st and 2nd Italian Division, effectively isolating the 1st Division to the north and gaining a local numbers advantage. While undertaking this manoeuvre though, the Austrian ships received a withering fire from Admiral Vacca in the 1st Division, only being able to respond with their chase guns. Persano was still transferring his flag and rowing over to Affontadore, gave absolutely no orders, and gave up any chance he had to actually damage the Austrian fleet, as the 2nd and 3rd Division remained completely still and out of the battle. The Austrians broke through the killing zone, and some ships suffering significant damage, but no losses were inflicted. The most damaged ship being, in the 1st Division, the SMS Geraque, which was hit 17 times and lost her captain, mainmast, and temporarily even her propulsion. The ship would soon be brought back into the fight though, under the command of her executive officer. After breaking the Italian line in two, the Austrians were able to bring Vacca's 1st Division to near point-blank range, completely isolating it from the rest of the fleet, with the SMS Habsburg, SMS Salamander, and SMS Kaiser Max on the Austrian left, taking the Italian 1st Division under fire, while the Austrian right, consisting of the SMS Don Juan de Austria, SMS Geraque, and SMS Prinz Eugen, engaged the 2nd Division, with the exception of Persano and Affontadore, who at this point was staying well clear of the engagement, even though he was the most powerful ship in both fleets, sort of just watching. Now it was time for SMS Kaiser and her wooden walls to shine. Under the command of Commodore von Petz, Kaiser and her 5 accompanying wooden frigates sailed behind the Italian 2nd Division to fall on the Italian 3rd Division. The unarmoured ships, should be noted, were attacking modern ironclads, who by all means rendered them obsolete. But SMS Kaiser did not hear no bell. The frigates during this engagement would suffer incredibly badly, with the SMS Novara being hit 47 times and losing her captain. SMS Herzog Friedrich was hit below the waterline by a shell and critically damaged but just remained afloat. SMS Schwarzenberg was not so lucky and was disabled by enemy fire and began to drift aimlessly. Commodore Petz by this point must have decided that he didn't give two cares in the world whether his ship was obsolete or whether it was the most powerful ship in the world, because while under fire from 3 ironclads, Castelfaro Varis and Principe de Cargonio, Kaiser began to trade body blows and broadsides, and closed in for what would become a brutal melee. By this point the battle was, despite the questionable decisions by the Italian leadership, seemingly going poorly for the Austrians. But like at Trafalgar, the localized numbers that advantage that Tegetthoff achieved left the Italian fleet broken up into smaller group of individual ships. This was the key, as it allowed the Austrian ships to fight 2 ships to the Italian 1. It became very clear that, ever so slowly, that the smaller, yet better trained Austrians were slowly overcoming their Italian counterparts. Persano decided then that instead of committing Affontadore into the now losing battle between the Austrian 1st and Italian 2nd Divisions, he would now sail south and attack SMS Kaiser, who at this exact moment was fighting a 3-on-1 engagement against the aforementioned ironclads. Affontadore attempted to ram Kaiser, which it was designed to do, and it missed, and succeeded in only annoying Commodore Petz, who responded by ramming the ironclad Re di Portogallo with his wooden ship. which at this time was also trying to ram Kaiser. Clearly having taken notes from Fontadore that the most prudent thing to do with a modern ironclad was to focus on sinking the wooden Kaiser, even though the rest of the fleet further north was losing to the Austrian ironclads. Kaiser left Re di Portogallo with a gift in the form of much of her bow, splintered and broken embedded inside the Italian ship, and for her efforts, Kaiser was then raked with heavy fire, before both ships then lost sight of each other in the smoke. Kaiser, then continuing to not care about her disadvantage and basically get up and just keep smacking people, now slowed by, missing half of her bow, continued to shoot the ever-loving crap out of the Italian 3rd Division while covering her beleaguered frigates. Fontadore tried to ram Kaiser again, but also missed for a second time. However, she did manage a hit with one of her guns, which did start a fire and caused extensive holing on Kaiser, whose crew began then to rain rifle fire onto Fontadore. Additionally, a large caliber shell from Kaiser was able to jam the forward turret of Fontadore. Kaiser, at this point having fought off essentially 4 ships which should have sunk it, and having missing most of its bow, being on fire, missing its funnel, and sporting a very large, rather obvious hole, was ordered by Commodore Petz to make for the island of Lissa. And even though the battle was going incredibly poorly by this point, the Italian ships under the command of Admiral Albini remained outside the battle, sitting idly by the island of Lissa, where Persano had left him. It's no secret at the time the Italian naval commanders disliked one another, and this is kind of a key example of their miscommunication and general hatred. Had Albini sailed north and actually done something against the Austrians, instead of doing whatever he was doing, it is highly likely the Italian fleet would have overwhelmed the Austrians at this critical juncture, who had yet to inflict, with the exception of the Kaiser ramming Re di Portogallo, any serious injury against the Italian fleet. Jumping back to the battle, Admiral Tegetthoff decided that his flagship SMS Ferdinand Max would be better used as a battering ram, and threw his ship at the first ship in the Italian line that he could find, the Re d'Italia. The poor Re d'Italia was being looked at by everyone as if she was still the flagship and being asked, what do we do? Even though their actual flagship of Fontadore was busy not giving orders and trying to ram a basically stationary ship and missing. In the case of Re d'Italia, SMS Ferdinand Max's ram was glancing. However, her second ram on the Palestro was completely fatal as she began to roll over and she exploded, taking all but 19 men down with her after the order to abandon ship was refused. Tegetthoff brought Ferdinand Max around for a second go at Re d'Italia, and this time he was successful, with a devastating ram leaving a 5-meter gash in the Italian ship's hull. Her captain, according to legend, gave the order to abandon ship and then shot himself. It's rather dramatic. After single-handedly sinking 2 ironclads, Ferdinand Max was, a little worse for wear, and she was limping away from the fight, undoubtedly satisfied with her achievements, but a bit sore, when the ironclad Ancona appeared and bared down on the stricken vessel. The Austrian crew braced and attempted to fight back, only to witness the greatest light show of their lives. The Italians on Ancona, in their flurry of excitement, forgot to actually load their guns with anything other than gunpowder. Tegetthoff was saluted by the crowed Venetian, Istrian, and Dalmatian sailors in his fleet with the cry, Viva San Marco, and then Ferdinand Max fell back to safety. Tegetthoff then ordered his ironclads to disengage the Italian ironclads, the goal being to defend the wooden ships that were damaged from the 2nd Division. Kaiser would continue into the harbour at Lissa in her battered state, and she now made port. The Italian admirals not really still speaking to each other, and with demoralised crews after the sinkings of Palestro and Re d'Italia, ordered a retreat after 5.5 hours of fighting, in which their lines were completely broken by Tegetthoff. Kaiser's final encounter with the Fontadore signalled the end of the battle, and soon after, Tegetthoff would lead his fleet into the harbour at Lissa to find the Kaiser neatly sitting in port. The following morning, Kaiser sent a dispatch to Admiral Tegetthoff and reported herself fit and ready for battle. Kaiser remains the only wooden ship to ever fight an ironclad in battle, and her feat of fighting not only 1 but 4 ironclads remains to this day an unprecedented achievement. The Italian fleet reached port, meanwhile, and without a moment's delay, Persano declared that he'd achieved a tremendous victory, which, see above. The lie did not exactly hold, as Albini and Vacca, as previously stated, hated Persano, and it wasn't long until the truth came out that the Italians had had the crap beaten out of them, and the blame was all thrown at Persano, which, fair. The loss of 2 ironclads, coupled with the recent land defeats, caused incredible outrage within Italy, and Persano was quickly condemned for his incompetence and stripped of his rank as an admiral. Comparatively, Albini, who made the decision to not reinforce the Italian fleet with his disengaged squadron, was merely relieved of his command. Admiral Vacca, the only Italian naval commander at the battle to not give any questionable commands that directly led to the loss, was retiring soon due to his age, so, no action was taken against him. Comparatively, Tegetthoff returned home to a hero's welcome, nothing short of what Nelson received in the UK. In short order, he was promoted to Vice Admiral, and to this day he is considered one of the greatest commanders in Austrian history, with ships and places named in his honour, including the most powerful ships to ever sail in the Austrian Navy, the Tegetthoff-class dreadnought battleships, which, in my opinion, are one of the coolest looking dreadnoughts ever. This battle really was the high note for the Austrians during the war, though, as although they had soundly defeated the Italians at Lissa, they had been very soundly defeated themselves on land, suffering unrecoverable defeats from the Prussian end of the war. Lissa had, in effect, essentially no outcome on the conflict. The Austrian defeat at the Battle of Königgrätz by the aforementioned Prussians, coupled with the French Emperor Napoleon III forcing Austria into a corner, enforced a peace where Austria had to begrudgingly cede Venetia to Italy, but retained control of South Tyrol. Due to the fact the Austrians remained undefeated on land and sea by the Italians, they were less than happy with the idea of handing over territory, and it was decided, due to this unhappiness, that they would cede Venetia and Venice to the French, who would then give it to the Italians, but they would not give it to the Italians directly. Lissa did have one important effect on history that likely came back to hurt the Austrians. The victory over the Italians forced the latter to give up their claims on the Illyrian coast and the Dalmatian Islands, claims that the Italians would use to justify their abandonment of treaties in World War I, and the subsequent joining of the Entente. It should be noted that, in this war, the Italians again did not receive their claimed territory, and this directly influenced their involvement in the Second World War. The Austrian loss in this war had a further knock-on effect. The Austrian Navy would remain an incredibly powerful force and retain control over the Adriatic Sea. Secondly, the end of this war cemented Prussia as the predominant power in Central Europe, and the definitive leader of what would become the North German Union, later the German Empire. The Battle of Lissa also had the strange effect of bringing an ancient naval tactic into the modern world. For the next 50 years, naval architects would fit ram bows on cruisers and battleships, being obsessed with the idea of ramming. A very specific kind of ship was even built around the idea of the ram and torpedo, and a well-known fictional example of this ship exists, the HMS Thunderchild from the War of the Worlds, and it's based off, in my opinion, the real-life HMS Polyphemus. The ram would never be used in combat again, however, and a number of ships would be sunk by their own sides in accidents causing thousands of deaths. The obsession with the world's navies on ramming may have directly hindered the developments in naval gunnery. Lissa was fought at a particularly interesting time of history. At this moment, the armour on ships was in fact stronger than many guns available, meaning that many ships were relatively invulnerable to gunfire. That is, of course, not including SMS Kaiser, who by all means should have been torn in half by the Italian ironclads. It was only down to her crew, training, and sheer willpower of her captain that the Kaiser managed to perform in such a way that she did, that she outshined every single ship there that day, with the exception of maybe only SMS Ferdinand Max. Kaiser herself would go on to have a long career. Her damage was extensive following the battle, and in a way as a reward she was entirely rebuilt as an ironclad in 1869. Budget delays though meant that this conversion was not completed until 1873, and by this time Kaiser was again outdated due to the widespread introduction of turreted ships. Kaiser would remain in service from 1875 to 1902, and was periodically modernised throughout the 1870s and 1880s to improve her ability to fight should she be needed to take up arms. In either 1901 or 1902, Kaiser was renamed to Bellona, her guns and engine removed, and she became a barrack ship moored permanently in Pola, remaining in this role throughout the First World War, and before, in a cruel and ironic twist of fate, being ceded to the Italians following the cessation of hostilities in 1918. Bellona, Kaiser's fate is unknown, but she undoubtedly will be remembered for her David vs. Goliath stand,